Started. So, kia ora koutou, ko Amelia Sharma Takawengoa. I'm Director of Sustainability Reporting here at the External Reporting Board, and I have Jack Bissett with me, Policy Manager Climate Sustainability. So today we're going to be running you through our request for information on the international alignment of climate reporting. So I will just share my screen so you can start seeing all the content. Okay, so today this webinar is about the consultation process and it's a chance to ask questions about the consultation. We've got some feedback sessions that are scheduled for later on in June where you can give your feedback, but please put any and all questions that you have for today in the Q&A box, and Jack will be monitoring those and I will be monitoring those, and we can answer them as we go or at the end of the session. So if you haven't read the request for information, it's very short, it's only 10 pages. Please use the QR code here on the screen, and there's lots of links. And this webinar is being recorded and it will be put on the XRB's website, so you can refer to it after the fact. So what are we doing today? So firstly, we're just going to run through about this consultation, why are we consulting, and I would emphasize this is specifically an RFI, request for information. We are very interested in your views, but also why you hold your views. And so that why could be about providing supporting information or evidence, such as references to facts and figures, investments, costs, etc., research, or any examples. So that's really, really important for us. So, and then we have a section which Jack is going to run through. What do we mean by international alignment? What does the landscape look like? What are we talking about in that space? And then finally, I'll run through the details of how you can respond, and we'll have that wrap up of any Q&A we haven't dealt with throughout the session. So, about the consultation, what is going on? So why are we consulting? At the time of issuing Aotearoa New Zealand Climate Standards, NZCS, we stated our intention to begin a post-implementation review by the end of this year, 2025. And with the intention really, so we've got an effectiveness evaluation of the consultation running right now, and that would be enough time to have a bit of an understanding about some of the statements that were coming through, and then we could do that quite early PIR to determine whether the standards are meeting the needs of climate reporting entities and the primary users of climate statements. And that meeting the needs is about achieving the stated purpose of climate reporting in the Financial Reporting Act, as well as the objective and ultimate aim in Aotearoa New Zealand Climate Standards. However, we've been trying to listen and adjust as we've been going along, acknowledging this is a really new regime, and that has meant, for example, providing additional guidance and as well as this consultation that we did last year and some subsequent amendment of the adoption provisions in NZCS 2. But that 2024 consultation that we did was really valuable because it gave us quite strong feedback that we might need to bring forward some of those aspects of the post-implementation review. So what we intended to do was consult as a package on three things. Firstly, on reduced disclosures, so that could be simplified disclosures or fewer disclosures, or for some or all entities. 2, disclosures for different classes of entities. So as you all know, there's a very wide breadth of entities in this regime. And do we need to write different standards or different requirements for those different entity classes? We did ask that in the initial consultation, but about, revisiting that question. And then thirdly, on this topic of international alignment. So we understand, however, that the government, because of this consultation that the government commenced in December 2024, are intending to make some decisions on reporting thresholds before the end of Q2 this year, so before the end of June 2025. So we considered actually that it was quite prudent to wait for asking for information on reduced disclosures and disclosures for different classes of entity until we know more about the government's decisions. But we're still really keen to know about that third topic, that international alignment topic, because it does act as a kind of coordinating point around which we might make some of those other decisions. So the purpose of this RFI, this consultation, is to request information about the value of international alignment to climate reporting entities and primary users of climate statements, and to understand exactly what type of international alignment is most desirable and why. And I use that term exactly on purpose because we have heard over the last several years that international alignment as a broad concept is important, but we really need to know at this point, well, what does that mean exactly? And Jack will run through why the context of that international alignment has changed and why we're asking some of that in a bit more detail now. As I said earlier, we're really interested in why you hold your views. So we're very keen on supporting information and evidence. So references to facts, figures, relevant examples, costs and investment, and that can include current and expected costs and investments, as well as investments already made or costs already incurred. We will be guided in this entire process by these decision-making principles that you can see here on the screen. Firstly, that really strategic focus for us at the XRB, that standards need to be internationally aligned and locally relevant. So there's that that conscious trade-off that we're always making there. And then we need to have a very clear understanding about those future investments and ongoing costs, the usefulness of the information, and then that complexity of standard setting. So we don't want to end up with, too many standards and standards that only apply to a handful of entities. That's not good standard setting. So we're really paying attention to that in the context of what's happening in New Zealand, as well as in the context of what's happening internationally. This is the RFI document also explains that this is the first phase of a potential 3-phase process. So in this phase 1, we're requesting information and evidence from as many climate reporting entities and primary users as possible so we can obtain a really thorough understanding of the issues. And as I said, so we're doing this current consultation on international alignment as phase 1A. And we plan to consult on that question of differential reporting, so different reporting for different sizes or classes of entity after the government has announced its decisions on reporting thresholds. Phase 2, if there is clear support for change with really good information provided, what we can then do is publish a consultation document outlining specific change options, and we would do that in the second half of this year. And we will, at that point, we would seek information from you all about whether the status quo should be retained or whether specific changes should be made, so in comparison to those options. And then we would use that information obtained in phases 1 and 2 to decide whether to make any changes to Aotearoa New Zealand climate standards, and if so, what those changes would be. So if the XRB concludes that changes are needed, we would then publish one or more exposure draft climate standards, and then the standards would subsequently be issued. Now, should any standard setting be required, and depending on the nature of the changes, some of these options are much more complicated than others, we do envisage aiming to issue relevant standards by June 26. That is quite a quick process, but as I said, it's really dependent on the nature of the changes that might be made. So now we're going to talk about the second part of this webinar, which is international alignment, and I will hand over to you, Jack.
Thank you, Amelia. Kia ora, everybody. Jack here. Looking forward to a couple of slides from me on international alignment. So if you move to the next slide, Amelia, I thought we'd start off with a bit of a, anyone who's heard me present recently, I can't help myself, a bit of an analogy. So we're going to use a horse race this time. So this is just to, I guess, go back to 2015 and some of the context for basically international alignment and some of the issues that we're now facing in New Zealand. So back in 2015, we had the sort of gun go off to start the race. That was with the signing of the Paris Agreement back in about 2015 or thereabouts. And then in 2017, followed up with the recommendations of the TCFD and also some of the early standards back then from the GRI and the like, and some of the other players back then have since kind of folded away and been morphed into the ISSB and other fates such as that. And so really what we did at that time as the XRB, releasing our standard at the end of 2022, was really focused on turning the TCFD's voluntary recommendations into a piece of secondary legislation in New Zealand. But that was the main game. And obviously we had the ISSB, who was very relevant, coming on stream, but we were really, one of the leading countries, along with, at the time, the US, with the US SEC, which has since faded away, famously, and also, countries like the UK, who have also since slowed down a bit in the race, but, quickly catching steam again. But, that was really the focus, was trying to stay as internationally aligned as possible, but having to make some decisions that were effectively leading the way globally, because that was just the nature of where New Zealand was at. But since the IFRS Foundation has released its climate standard, in particular S2, and then a range of countries have moved to adopt that, and then a range of countries, particularly around Europe, have been adopting the European Sustainability Reporting standards, which are, potentially got their lineage back to the GRI a little more than the TCFD. Then we're, really got a busy picture now, where we've had a range of countries and jurisdictions, who have now entered the race and who are potentially traveling really, really fast. So, this is our new picture that we need to be grappling with now, which is effectively making good decisions about what exactly we might align with, without it being a sort of a simple case of being able to align with one horse. There's many players now, and we want to hear from you, basically, which of these are the most relevant and why, so that the XRB can make good decisions. And just to, rattle through some of these ones who have entered the race, we've got obviously China, Japan, Australia there, then that's Brazil, Canada in the red, the UK Department of Business and Trade, Nigeria, Singapore, and then the US, 3 US states over there on the bottom left. If you keep going to the next slide, Amelia. So basically this slide's about, well, what are some of the chunky international alignment issues that we're going to get into and that we're interested in hearing from you on. So basically, what is international alignment in this space? I mean, I think first and foremost, we recognize we're only talking about climate standards here. And on climate, there's definitely a lot of convergence around the TCFD globally. So there is a strong degree of alignment, generally speaking, and a greater degree of alignment than with other sustainability standards on other sustainability topics. However, in our view, a lot of these countries are tending to implement climate disclosures with some differences, and even those drawing on the ISSB, S2 can do so differently, and then obviously not all necessarily, starting with the ISSB standards as their starting point. If you keep going, so then, well, why is international alignment important? I mean, we see this as a really crucial issue, and we've heard this in previous consultations, as Amelia said, which is strong desire from New Zealand climate reporting entities and also users to be keeping pace with, this international picture and what's moving. There's the dimension of ensuring international access to capital is retained, or as looking as good as possible given these changing circumstances globally. There's certainly a desire to be reducing any unnecessary regulatory burden, particularly around things like having to report twice with 2 different standards in mind. And again, the need to make sure that there is locally relevant standards at the same time. So then the next question is, well, so looking ahead, what might New Zealand and the XRB do? Exactly whom, would this alignment focus on? And so, the ISSB is obviously a crucial player now globally, who've released IFRS S2, considered the global baseline, and, comparisons that we've undertaken with our standards and theirs, show a very strong degree of alignment, but quite a large number of differences in detail, and there are more requirements in IFRS S2, for example. Then we have Australia, who's obviously recently moved very fast in the space with the standards released by the AASB, and those are based on IFRS S2. They've also had an interesting process whereby there was some pressure and ultimately decisions made to put some requirements in the primary legislation rather than the way our standards work, where that was all left to the secondary legislation and the standards. And they also decided to not include the S2 industry-based metrics. So obviously a very relevant player. Then we've got other countries using the IFRS S2, which includes Japan, China, Singapore, UK, Canada, Brazil, Nigeria, for example, but quite diverse approaches to that adoption or introduction into their country. China, for example, also using double materiality as an idea. Then we've got these other standards as well. For example, in Europe with double materiality, these US states, still relatively early days there, but interesting to watch. And then, the GRI, which has, been around a long time, not always been mentioned as a major standard on climate, but that's okay. Keep me moving, that's good. Short, long and the short of that slide is, there is a lot moving. There is also some rollback in some countries, potentially pausing or not introducing requirements as fast as originally intended, or looking to reduce the requirements that have already been out. But I think that the overall picture is that, well, the horses are still all running pretty fast and in the same direction, but a little bit of pulling back on the ropes there. I forget the technical term for the poor old horse's mouth. So sorry, if you can go to the next slide, Amelia. So then we've got an example here. This is our recently released interoperability tool, which is an example of some of the differences with Australia, obviously an important jurisdiction for New Zealand to be looking at. Shout out to Lisa and our team who put this together, and shows quite a lot of difference in this at least numerical picture around number of disclosures being sought, at least at a high level. So these are the kind of issues that we are keen to hear from you around. What do you think about these? Then the last thing I've got here is at the bottom is this point around mutual recognition. We know that this is a topic of high interest, and even though it's a decision of the regulator, so in our case, the Financial Markets Authority, the FMA, it is relevant for this RFI, so we do want to hear your views on this. So what is mutual recognition? It's basically a process whereby jurisdictions agree that compliance by an entity with a regulatory regime in, say, New Zealand, a home jurisdiction, will also meet in other countries' regulatory requirements, say overseas, somewhere like Australia. So that's also relevant. That's why we want to hear from you about that, even though it's not a decision by the XRB. I'll hand back to you, Amelia, to keep going. They're out of the race for me, but I'll jump back on the Q&A.
Excellent, thank you, Jack. So in the RFI document, we have a series of key issues that we're considering, and then we have 7 questions that we're interested in understanding more information from you about. So in terms of the key issues, so for us, it's really, what does this idea of closer international alignment mean? What should it mean for us in New Zealand? Which standards or jurisdictions are the most important? We can align with a standard, or we can try and align with how a jurisdiction has adopted a standard. These are, these can be quite different. We really want to hear your views about what is the most important to you, and to the, to the climate reporting entities and to the primary users of climate statements. And, one of the other key issues we have is that question of timing. Hopefully you all saw really clearly it's continuing to be this highly, rapidly evolving context. We want to know whether now is the right time to amend or replace NZCS to achieve that degree of closer alignment with any other standard, or do we wait? There's some questions around waiting to allow things to develop, but also systems and processes do get implemented. So we're really keen on your understanding of what the timing should be and why is it important for you. And then
Can I jump in there, Amelia, just before you keep going through that list? I thought maybe there's a relevant question on that one here from Donovan might be good. Good time to ask it. So he's asked basically, should the issue of costs also be the costs of alignment if the international standards are no good? New Zealand is one of the few that are ahead of the game here, thinking timing wise. So aligning to standards that are yet to be tested is also risky.
A really good question, Donovan, and it's a fair point. So that, you know how I talked about at the beginning, that timing, hoping to begin the post-implementation review by the end of 2025, we were really hoping that by that point, we would start to see some statements come out, some reporting come out based on some of these other jurisdictions and some of these other standards. So to our knowledge, we don't have any examples of what an IFRS S2 report would look like. We also don't have any examples, obviously because of the Australian timing, what a AASB S2 report looks like. We don't know. We can make an educated guess and effort here to understand. But that diagram we had also, I mean, that's just the count of requirements. It doesn't give us any sense of the effort that some of these additional or different requirements might take vis-a-vis the effort of what it takes to report under NZCS. So, yeah, it is that change when you don't quite know what the other change option is. That's really relevant for us, and that's why we do have that really specific question around timing. How important is it that we do any change now, or do we wait? We're really, really keen to understand more on that. And then just on that issue of timing, one of the other kind of sets of issues we're considering as part of this RFI is about the desirability of particular implementation pathways. So we want to know about what people think of the desirable endpoints. Where should we end up in terms of alignment? But, we're very aware that the change process to different standards is also costly, but maybe the end benefit of that change process is worth it. So, for example, if we retained NZCS, how much, when would any further changes to achieve that closer international alignment be desirable? Or we have an option to revoke NZCS and adopt another standard. And we are very conscious of the time that it would take for entities to understand that new standard, to be able to respond to a consultation process to understand. Given, as I said, we don't have any examples of what reporting under some of those standards looks like. But, maybe those one-off costs would be deemed worthwhile because they achieve that greater degree of international alignment in the end. So there's quite a lot of complexity here that we want to engage with you on. And then, as I said, 7 questions in the RFI. It's the who, what, when, why. We've got a question on mutual recognition, any other comments. So we're just very keen to get your views, focusing on the precision there, the exactly what, and please give us some information to support those views. That's the most helpful feedback for us at this point. So how can you respond? We know that these issues are complex, so you are more than welcome to give us written feedback. You can give us a traditional, comment letter. You can just send us an email. You can use our online submission template. Or we're hosting a couple of XRB hosted feedback sessions. They will be Zoom meetings, so everyone will be able to speak and give feedback. And we're also doing some industry hosted feedback sessions. So we're starting to publicise those with particular umbrella groups. If your industry really wants a feedback session, please reach out to us. Email us at sustainability@xrb.govt.nz and we can get one of those started, because we know that some of these are quite nuanced, and that discussion and understanding of the difference of opinion is really valuable, and difference of information is really valuable to us. It closes on the 13th of June. The reason being, we do want to keep moving, because if there is a desirability of change and we want to hit that June 26 deadline, we do need to get that information back in. So that is all we have for today. Please sign up. If you're not getting our climate alerts, please, use this QR code or go onto the website and sign up at the top of the page. That's where we are putting out all of the information, and you can access past climate alerts where they have things like that interoperability tool. That is an overview document, and then there's actually that's supported by an Excel sheet where you can really look at the specific disclosure requirements. We're very keen for feedback on the utility of that tool as well. So what I'll do is I will stop sharing my screen. And here we go. And are there any further questions? Please put your questions in the chat. We are here to answer them.
Yes. Thanks, Amelia. So one more question at the moment in the Q&A from Jess. So yes, another chance for everyone to go in there, put some questions in. I'm just looking at the time. We've got lots of time left. So yep, don't be shy, please go in there, put some more questions. Okay, that's enough stalling. Okay, Jess, her question is, just in terms of timing, would you be consulting later this year on potential change options and then next year on exposure drafts of amended standards? Question mark.
So it really depends, Jess, on what we hear. So if we hear at this phase 1, really clear message to align with a particular standard or a particular jurisdiction, and we get some, really good information, that would speed up the process, and we would be looking to do, we could move through that process a bit more quickly. As I said, but if there's diverse views, we have to do a bit more digging and weigh some of those options up. As I said, the government is looking to make their decisions by the end of Q2, and then those other questions on differential reporting would also play a part in this wider decision. So it's not that we're just thinking about international alignment on its own from the differential reporting, the sizes and classes of entities. We do have to kind of think about how those things would fit together, because we could theoretically have a different standard, for the different sizes and classes of entities that are internationally aligned differently. I don't think that would probably be a good outcome, to have different alignment options for our different sets of standards there if we did go down a multi-standards route. But so hopefully we would be getting that exposure draft out by the end of this year or early next year, but I can't give a guaranteed date.
Okay, nice one. The next point is probably more of a statement from James than a question, but I'll maybe ask it with a bit of inflection at the end, and I'm sure you might have something to say in response to this. So James says, agree with Donovan's point, and I would add that in New Zealand, approaches in reporting will continue to evolve, and we are early on in terms of good practice. For example, the financial quantification part under the AASB is far more involved than the New Zealand requirements.
So yeah, it is that the timing is really difficult. It's evolving so quickly. I mean, we do spend a lot of time at the XRB keeping pace with what is happening in other jurisdictions, asking about, their issues around implementation. So in the RFI document, we do talk about, for example, as Jack mentioned, the process of simplification that the Europeans are going through at the moment. That's highly relevant for us. But we don't know the effort that goes into some of these reporting requirements quite yet. We are lucky here in New Zealand that we do have some implementation experience, and it is first year implementation experience. So as we get into second, third, fourth year, what does that look like? Is it different? Post-implementation reviews are often about 5-ish years or more into the implementation of a reporting standard. So this was going to be an early one anyway, but we wanted to do that because we knew that, these things are new, and we were asking something different of people. So Very keen, yeah. As I said, I can't emphasize it enough to get your views on particular things. I mean, if you want to get down in your responses to details around particular disclosure requirements, that's super helpful too, because it gives us a steer on what is relevant. And even some of the principles, Jack mentioned that some of the other standards in other jurisdictions have different principles, so double materiality versus single materiality, or thinking differently about some of the other principles and requirements. So we're keen on understanding more about views there too.
Okay, got another question here from AA anonymous attendee. How are you going to manage that diversity of feedback, noting that you have companies who are subsidiaries of Australian, UK, European, and other companies who will all be pushing for alignment with their particular standard?
Absolutely. It's a really good question. So that's why we want that supporting information. Why is that particular alignment of interest to you? So, and that's where those other things like mutual recognition come in. So if we get a whole lot of feedback that goes, hey, Australia is super, super critical to us, that's relevant information that we can give to our friends at the FMA. And, they work with ASIC on mutual recognition. I know that there's also been discussions of starting discussions because California has requested information on mutual recognition with other jurisdictions. So we can look at different ways to approach that international alignment with different jurisdictions. I don't think it's just going to be a straight numbers game in terms of X number of entities want alignment with X, and therefore we go with that. We really want to know, and that's our job, is to look at, are there any similarities in the reporting requirements? What can we do to make life as easy as possible? Knowing that these reporting requirements in these other places are not as settled as potentially, as definitely they are in the financial reporting space in some areas.
Yeah, and I guess maybe just to add, Amelia, I think because of the next phase around differential reporting, where we can potentially have different classes and different sizes, basically standards for different sizes, that's effectively another, those are tools in the toolbox around, yes, it'll be, say, thinking about just the insurers, for example. Yes, we'd probably expect some divergence in terms of different insurers having different, priorities in terms of international alignment, but we would expect the insurers as a group to have, probably a relatively consistent message compared with the banks, compared with the fund managers, compared with the corporates. So, and then if it divides along those kind of lines, then, we can go with the flow, but it might come out differently. And then we'd, but that's our job, I guess, to manage. I think we're ready for some complexity. Our sleeves are rolled up, and we genuinely think that, we're open-minded as to how to balance these things best. So I think we're definitely looking forward to that work.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the questions in the RFI does talk about how much importance and should the XRB place on alignment with requirements that are not based on standards. So, we at the moment, we've talked mostly about standards in other jurisdictions, but we're really, really acutely aware that there are a lot of information requests that come down through those value chain relationships. And we really want to know how much. I mean, ultimately, some of those might be flowing down from a reporting requirement in another jurisdiction, in which case standards alignment to that jurisdiction helps. But they might not. They might be coming down through, market trends, customer demand, other non-jurisdictional standards reporting. So, obviously, you all know things like B Corps and those other things, CDP questionnaires. What does it look like to have alignment with things that aren't standards? That's something else that we are very interested in hearing your views on.
Okay, we got two more questions. Thank you. First one from Barry, I think, is, are there good source materials on what appear to be the main differences in international standards?
We have to make those, Barry, mostly. So that's the hard work of, Lisa and our team has done amazing work comparing with between us and Australia, us and the IFRS. I mean, the IFRS and EFRAG have done their interoperability toolkit, looking at the differences between their standards. I mean, there are a variety of sources trying to understand what the differences are and what the similarities are. I would emphasize that all of that work really is only at the level of the standards requirement rather than looking at what the differences in the reporting is, because as I keep saying, we don't know what reporting looks like under some of these standards because it hasn't happened yet. So the comparisons are out there. Everyone's busy doing our best to work on them, but they are at the level of the differences in the requirement, and we do put that as a massive caveat on any of those alignment documents that we produce.
Okay, nice one. Okay, Lisa has a question for us. The objective of the NZCS differs to that of other standards. Is a change to the overall objective / purpose of the standard within scope of the consultation?
So in scope of the consultation is changes to Aotearoa New Zealand climate standards. So that is any of it. So yes, that could be, as we say in the RFI document, that can be revising NZCS. And so that could be small, that could be revisions within it. It could also mean revoking NZCS and adopting a different standard. So for example, if we could revoke NZCS and look to adopt IFRS S2. Now, what that means is, if you want to state compliance, that's another really important point. If an entity wants to state compliance with another standard, say IFRS S2, we'd have to think very carefully then in New Zealand about what local changes we would make. As Jack notes, there are local changes as entities are, as jurisdictions, are adopting IFRS standards. Australia has made some. What does it look like for us to, what would it look like for us to make those, for example? What I don't think is in scope at the moment is any amendment to the purpose of climate reporting in the Financial Reporting Act. Now, that's really important to note, because that purpose of climate reporting in our primary legislation is to give benefit to the entity and to give benefit to the user. So it should be about enhancing the decision making of the entity as well as the user. That is one of the core things we have paid attention to in the development of our standards, that we want it to be useful to the entity as well as to the primary user. Now, that purpose, that value to the entity is not part of the design of some of these other standards that we're looking at. And so we would have to really think very carefully about, those other standards, IFRS S2, etc. What do they give, and would they meet our need for the purpose of climate reporting in the Act? That is that it has to have value to the entity. So yeah, again, that's another tension that we're looking at. But yeah, definitely anything inside what we produce is up for. We're always open to looking at this point what it needs to be. We don't want to be changing standards willy-nilly. We do want to give regulatory certainty, but we did hear really strongly that there was some change needed.
Thanks, Amelia. Okay, here's another question. This one's on mutual recognition. I suspect this might be a better question that ideally the FMA would answer. I don't think we've got the, I think Jenica's on the call, but I don't think we've got the ability to pass through the microphone. So perhaps we'll suggest that you could follow up with the FMA if interested. This says, what type of specific information would be compelling to support mutual recognition between New Zealand and Australia? If Australia did not recognise New Zealand, would there still be consideration of New Zealand recognising Australia?
Oh yes, that is well beyond what I can answer. I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know if mutual recognition. I think my guess would be it's in the name. You'd have to mutually recognise, but yeah, I would definitely. What we want to hear in this RFI is how important is mutual recognition to you, and if and how would it impact your answers to any of our other questions. And the FMA has stated that they are very interested in any of the mutual recognition information that we get as a part of this RFI. But what I don't know the answer to whether mutual recognition can only go one way. But please, yeah, just give us your views on how important you think it is for you.
Great. Okay, another second dig at the cherry from Donovan. He says, any big changes to the climate standards are a transition risk in their own right. Be good to see how many firms captured this in their disclosures. Smiley face.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay, that's all we've got for now. I can stall for 2 more seconds, but yes, thanks everyone for those questions. That was great.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please go have a look at the RFI. Please register for an XRB feedback session. If you want a particular industry focused one, please get in touch with us and we can organise that if it isn't in train already. Or just email us with any thoughts or questions that you have. We're always very keen to help. Thank you so much for your time today. As I said, this webinar will be posted on the XRB website so you can rewatch or answer any further questions. So thank you again. Have a look at the website. Any further final comments you want to have, Jack?
No, thanks everybody for joining.
Oh, thanks for the session. Excellent. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Ka kite anō.